The stagecoach robbery left Olivia Jenkins with three things: a shattered left shoulder, scars that ran from her collarbone to her elbow like twisted rope, and an unshakable determination to never be a victim again. She arrived in Ordway, Colorado on a blistering August afternoon in 1882. Her right hand gripping a carpet bag and her left arm hanging stiffly at her side, the scars visible beneath the rolled sleeve of her worn cotton dress. The stage driver had tried to help her down, but she'd refused with a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, landing on the dusty main street with more grace than anyone expected from a woman traveling alone with such obvious injuries. The town stretched before her like a promise she wasn't sure she believed in anymore. Ordway sat on the prairie where the Arkansas River carved its way through southeastern Colorado, a settlement that had sprung up along the railroad just a year prior. False-fronted buildings lined the wide dirt street, their fresh lumber already weathering under the relentless sun. Olivia counted 2 saloons, a general store, a blacksmith, a livery stable, and what appeared to be a modest hotel. It was exactly the kind of place where a woman could disappear into honest work and rebuild something resembling a life. She was 23 years old and felt ancient. The hotel clerk, a thin man with spectacles that kept sliding down his nose, openly stared at her scars as she signed the register. Olivia kept her expression neutral, something she'd perfected in the 6 months since the attack. People would stare. People would whisper. People would make assumptions about what kind of woman ended up scarred and traveling alone. She'd learned to let it roll off her back like rain off oilcloth, though sometimes late at night the weight of those stares pressed down on her chest until she couldn't breathe. "We don't allow," the clerk began, his tone suggesting he was about to refuse her a room based on some imagined impropriety. "I'm here about the teaching position," Olivia interrupted, her voice steady and clear. "The advertisement said Ordway needed a schoolteacher. I have references from the academy in Philadelphia." The clerk's expression shifted from suspicion to something like relief. A schoolteacher was respectable. A schoolteacher was safe. Never mind the scars or the way her left arm didn't quite move right. "Rooms $2 a week. School board meets Thursday evening." "Thank you." Olivia took the key and climbed the narrow stairs to her room, each step a small victory over the fatigue that had settled into her bones during the long journey west. The room was sparse but clean. A narrow bed, a washstand, a single window overlooking the street. She set down her bag and moved to the window, watching the town move through its afternoon rhythms. A wagon rumbled past loaded with supplies. 2 women in calico dresses walked together, their heads bent in conversation. And across the street, a man emerged from the blacksmith shop, leading a horse with careful, measured steps. Even from this distance, Olivia could see the pronounced limp in his gait. His right leg swung stiffly, and he favored his left side heavily as he walked. But his hands on the horse's lead were gentle and sure, and when the animal shied at something in the street, he calmed it with what appeared to be nothing more than a quiet word and a steady presence. Something about the sight made Olivia's chest tighten with an emotion she couldn't quite name. Perhaps it was simply recognition, one wounded creature observing another. She turned away from the window and began unpacking her few belongings, trying not to think about the man with the limp, or why his careful movements had stirred something in her that she'd thought the stagecoach robbers had killed along with everything else. Thursday evening arrived with the kind of golden light that made even a rough prairie town look beautiful. Olivia dressed in her best remaining dress, a deep blue cotton that her sister had made for her 22nd birthday, back when birthdays still felt like celebrations rather than just markers of time survived. She'd arranged her dark blonde hair in a simple bun and covered her scars with a light shawl despite the evening heat. Not because she was ashamed, she told herself, but because she wanted the school board to see her qualifications before they saw her injuries. The town hall was a modest wooden structure that also served as the church on Sundays and the dance hall on Saturday nights. 5 men sat behind a long table when Olivia entered. A banker who introduced himself as Mr. Whitmore, the proprietor of the general store, the town's only doctor, a rancher whose land bordered the town to the north, and a man Olivia didn't recognize who was introduced as Thomas Rutherford, the town's deputy. Thomas Rutherford was the man with the limp. Up close, she could see he was perhaps 27 or 28, with dark hair that wanted to curl despite being cut short, and eyes the color of weathered denim. A scar ran along his jawline, faint but visible, and his hands rested on the table with the kind of stillness that suggested hard-won control. When he looked at Olivia, his gaze went to her face first, then dropped briefly to where her shawl had slipped to reveal the top edge of her scars, then returned to her face without any change in expression. No pity, no disgust, no curiosity. Just a level, respectful regard that made something in Olivia's chest unclench slightly. "Miss Jenkins," Mr. Whitmore began, shuffling through some papers. "We received your letter and your references. Very impressive credentials from the Philadelphia Female Academy. What brings you all the way to Ordway?" Olivia had prepared for this question. "I wanted a fresh start, gentlemen. The West represents opportunity, and I wanted to be part of building something new. Your advertisement mentioned you had 15 children in need of education and no schoolhouse yet. I'm used to challenges. The position doesn't pay much," the store proprietor warned. $40 a month, and we can only guarantee 6 months of employment to start. If the town doesn't grow, we might not be able to afford a teacher long term. I understand. I'm willing to accept those terms. The doctor leaned forward, his expression kind but concerned. "Miss Jenkins, forgive my professional curiosity, but I notice you have some scarring on your arm. Will you be able to manage a classroom? Some of the older boys can be quite rambunctious." Here it was, the moment she'd been dreading. Olivia reached up and pulled the shawl away from her shoulder, letting them see the full extent of the scarring that crawled up her arm and across her collarbone. She heard one man draw in a sharp breath, but she kept her eyes on Thomas Rutherford. He was the only one still looking at her face. "I was injured in a stagecoach robbery 6 months ago," she said, her voice steady though her heart hammered against her ribs. "One of the robbers shot me in the shoulder. The doctor who treated me did what he could, but there was significant damage. My arm has limited mobility, and the scarring is permanent." She paused, letting them absorb this. "However, I can write on a blackboard. I can hold books. I can manage discipline with my voice and my presence rather than physical force, which I believe is more appropriate anyway. My injuries don't prevent me from being an excellent teacher." "And the men who did this?" the rancher asked gruffly. "They in jail. 2 of them are dead. The 3rd got away." Olivia said it flatly, without emotion, the way she'd learned to discuss the attack. The alternative was to feel it all over again, and she couldn't afford that right now. "Did the law catch him?" Mr. Whitmore asked. "Not yet." Thomas Rutherford spoke for the first time, his voice low and even. "The man who got away, do you know what he looked like?" Olivia met his eyes. "I gave descriptions to the authorities in Kansas. I doubt he'd come to a small town like this. Men like that prefer places where they can disappear into crowds." Thomas nodded slowly, but something in his expression suggested he was filing the information away for later consideration. "For what it's worth, Miss Jenkins, I think you'd make a fine teacher." The children need someone with backbone, and anyone who survives what you survived and then travels across half the country to start over has backbone to spare." The other men murmured agreement, and after a few more questions about her teaching methods and expectations, Mr. Whitmore offered her the position. Olivia accepted with a handshake that she made sure was firm despite the limited strength in her left hand. They told her school would start in 2 weeks, giving her time to prepare the small building that would serve as the schoolhouse. It had been a storage shed until recently, but the town had cleared it out and added desks donated by families. As the meeting broke up, Thomas Rutherford lingered while the other men filed out discussing town business. He stood with care, using his arms to push himself up before putting weight on his legs, and when he walked toward Olivia, she could see the full extent of his limp. His right leg didn't bend properly at the knee, forcing him to swing it slightly with each step. It was the walk of a man who'd adapted to permanent injury, who'd found a way to move through the world despite his body's limitations. "Miss Jenkins," he said when he reached her, "welcome to Ordway. I hope the town treats you well." "Thank you, Deputy Rutherford. I appreciate your support in there." "Thomas, please. We're not formal in Ordway." He glanced toward the door where the other board members had disappeared. "They're good men, but they can be a bit narrow in their thinking sometimes. A woman traveling alone with visible injuries, they'll have made assumptions." "I'm used to assumptions." Olivia pulled her shawl back over her shoulder, not from shame but from habit. "I imagine you are." Thomas was quiet for a moment, then said, "I got kicked by a horse when I was 19. Shattered my knee and part of my thigh. Doctor thought I might lose the leg, but I was stubborn. Kept it, but it doesn't work right anymore. Hurts like hell when the weather changes." Olivia wasn't sure what to say. It was rare for someone to share their story so openly, without preamble or awkwardness. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. I'm alive and I can still do my job. Could be worse." He met her eyes again with that same steady regard. "What I'm trying to say, badly, is that I understand what it's like when people see the injury before they see you. If anyone in town gives you trouble about the scars or about being a woman alone, you come find me. That's part of what I'm here for. To protect school teachers from gossip. To make sure everyone in Ordway is treated fairly." A hint of humor touched his eyes. "But especially school teachers. Education's important." Despite herself, Olivia smiled. It felt strange on her face, like a muscle she'd forgotten how to use. "I'll keep that in mind, Thomas." "Good." He tipped his hat to her and made his way to the door with that careful, swinging gait. At the threshold, he paused and looked back. "Oh, and Miss Jenkins, the scars don't diminish you. Anyone who thinks otherwise isn't worth your time." Then he was gone, limping out into the twilight, leaving Olivia standing alone in the empty hall with something warm and unfamiliar blooming in her chest. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. The schoolhouse was indeed just a converted storage shed, but it had a good roof and 4 walls and windows that let in plenty of light. Olivia scrubbed every surface until her good arm ached and her damaged one throbbed with the effort. She arranged the mismatched desks in rows, created a makeshift bookshelf from wooden crates, and used her limited funds to purchase slate boards and chalk from the general store. The store's proprietor, a jovial man named Mr. Henderson, proved to be a wealth of information about the town and its residents. He told her about the families whose children would attend school, about the ranchers and farmers scratching out livings from the difficult prairie soil, about the railroad that had brought prosperity and problems in equal measure. "Deputy Rutherford," Mr. Henderson said as he wrapped her purchases in brown paper. "Now there's a man worth knowing. Came here about 3 years ago after he healed up from his injury. Used to work cattle before the horse got him, but couldn't do that work anymore with the bad leg. Taught himself law enforcement. Can you imagine? Read every book he could get his hands on, practiced with firearms until he was better with a gun than most able-bodied men. When our previous deputy moved on, Thomas applied for the job. Best lawman this town's ever had, limp or no limp. He seems very capable, Olivia said carefully, not wanting to reveal too much interest. Oh, he is. He's also single, not that I'm one to gossip. Mr. Henderson winked at her. But a school teacher and a deputy, now that would be a fine match for Ordway. Olivia felt heat rise in her cheeks. I'm here to teach, Mr. Henderson, not to find a husband. Of course, but you'll forgive an old man for hoping. This town needs more good people putting down roots, starting families. Thomas especially deserves some happiness. He's been alone too long. Olivia took her packages and left before the conversation could continue, but Mr. Henderson's words stayed with her. She told herself she came west to teach, to start fresh, to rebuild a life that the robbery had shattered. Romance hadn't been part of the plan. How could it be? When she woke up most nights gasping from nightmares, when she couldn't stand to have anyone approach her from behind, when the scars on her arm were a constant reminder that the world was full of violence and cruelty. But she couldn't deny that she'd thought about Thomas Rutherford more than once since the school board meeting. The way he'd looked at her face instead of her scars. The way he'd shared his own story without making it sound like a competition of suffering. The care in his movements as he navigated a world built for undamaged bodies. She saw him occasionally around town, always in motion despite the limp, always with that quiet competence that seemed to calm whatever situation he entered. Once she watched him break up a dispute between two men outside a saloon, his voice too low to hear from where she stood, but effective enough that both men shook hands and went their separate ways without violence. Another time she saw him helping old Mrs. Patterson carry her groceries home, his gait even more labored under the extra weight but his expression patient and kind. He never approached Olivia directly, but she sometimes caught him watching her from across the street, his expression thoughtful. She wondered what he saw when he looked at her. Probably the same thing everyone else saw. A damaged woman trying to pretend she was whole. School started on a Monday morning in early September with Olivia standing at the front of the converted shed, facing 15 pairs of curious eyes. The children ranged from 6 to 14, a mixed group of farmers and ranchers' kids wearing their best clothes for the first day. Olivia had been nervous about this moment for weeks, worried that her arm or her scars would undermine her authority. But as she began speaking, introducing herself and outlining her expectations, she felt something settle into place. This was what she was meant to do. This was what the robbers hadn't been able to take from her. "My name is Miss Jenkins," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the small space. "I'm here to teach you reading, writing, arithmetic, history, geography, and anything else you're curious about learning. I expect respect, effort, and honesty. In return, I promise to respect you, to help you learn at your own pace, and to never give up on you, no matter how challenging the material might be." One of the older boys, a lanky 14-year-old named Jacob, raised his hand. "Miss Jenkins, what happened to your arm?" Olivia had known this question would come. She'd prepared for it. "I was hurt by some bad men, but I survived, and now I'm here to teach you. Just like Deputy Rutherford hurt his leg, but he still protects our town, I hurt my arm, but I can still teach. We all have challenges, but they don't have to stop us from doing important work." The children nodded, accepting this with the straightforward simplicity of youth, and then they moved on to the business of education. Olivia divided them into groups by ability rather than age, discovering quickly that some of the younger children could read better than the older ones who'd had less access to education. She moved between the groups, writing lessons on the blackboard, helping sound out difficult words, explaining mathematical concepts with examples drawn from ranch and farm life. By the time she dismissed them at 3 o'clock, Olivia was exhausted but deeply satisfied. The children had been eager and attentive, even the ones who struggled with the material. Several parents had stopped by during the day to observe, and they'd seemed pleased with what they saw. As the last student left, Olivia sank into her chair and allowed herself a moment of pride. She'd done it. First day successfully completed. Looks like you survived. Olivia looked up to find Thomas Rutherford standing in the doorway, hat in hand. The afternoon sun backlit him, making it hard to see his expression, but his voice carried warmth and something that might have been admiration. "I did more than survive," Olivia said, standing despite her fatigue. "I succeeded. I don't doubt it." Thomas stepped into the schoolhouse, his limp pronounced after what had likely been a long day on his feet. "I heard from half a dozen parents already that you're the best teacher this town's ever had." "I'm the only teacher this town's ever had." "True, but the point stands." He glanced around the tidy schoolroom, taking in the neat rows of desks, the carefully printed lessons on the blackboard, the books arranged on their makeshift shelves. "You've made something good here." "I'm trying." Olivia began gathering her materials, suddenly nervous at being alone with him in the small space. "Was there something you needed, Thomas?" "I wanted to check on you, make sure the first day went well, and I thought I might walk you back to the hotel if you're heading that way. Sun's getting low, and I like to keep an eye on who's moving around town in the evenings." "Is Ordway dangerous?" Olivia tried to keep her voice light, but she heard the edge of fear in it. 6 months hadn't been long enough to forget what men could do in the failing light. Thomas heard it too. His expression softened. "No more than any town. We get drifters passing through, occasional troublemakers, but nothing serious. I just believe in being thorough." He paused, then added gently, "But if you'd rather walk alone, I understand. I'm not trying to impose." Olivia considered. Every instinct she'd developed since the robbery told her to maintain distance, to keep men at arm's length, to never let anyone get close enough to hurt her again. But Thomas wasn't like the men who'd robbed the stage. He was steady and patient, and he looked at her like she was a person rather than a collection of scars and damage. "I'd appreciate the company," she said, surprising herself. They walked together through the cooling evening, Thomas's limping pace matching her careful one. The town was settling in for the night, lamps being lit in windows, businesses closing their doors. A few people called greetings to Thomas, and he responded with easy familiarity. Olivia could see that he was well-liked, respected despite, or perhaps because of his obvious injury. "How did you end up in law enforcement?" Olivia asked as they passed the blacksmith shop. "Mr. Henderson mentioned you worked cattle before." "I did. It was all I knew, all I ever wanted to do." Thomas's voice was matter-of-fact rather than bitter. "Then the horse kicked me, and suddenly I couldn't ride for 12 hours a day anymore. Couldn't rope cattle or brand them or do half the things the job required. I was 19 and I thought my life was over. What changed? My mother mostly. She refused to let me wallow. She said, 'Thomas, you've got a good mind and good hands and a sense of right and wrong. The leg doesn't work so well anymore, but the rest of you is fine. So stop feeling sorry for yourself and figure out what you can do instead of mourning what you can't.'" He smiled at the memory. She was a formidable woman. She passed 3 years ago. Fever took her quick. My father had died years before, so it was just me. That's when I came to Ordway, looking for a fresh start. Same as you, I suppose. They reached the hotel, but neither of them moved toward the door. The street was quiet except for piano music drifting from one of the saloons and the distant bark of a dog. Above them, stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, thousands of them in the clear prairie air. "Thomas," Olivia said quietly, "why did you vote for me at the school board meeting?" The others were skeptical. "Because you were the best candidate, still are, even with the scars. The scars are just something that happened to you, Olivia. They're not who you are." He looked at her directly, his eyes serious. "I know what it's like to have people see the injury first and make judgments based on it, to have them assume you're less capable, less valuable, less deserving of opportunity. It's wrong when they do it to me, and it would be wrong to do it to you. You survived something terrible and then you got up and kept going. That takes more strength than most people ever have to find." Olivia felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. "The leg is just something that happened to you." "Exactly." Thomas's smile was soft and understanding. "So we'll both keep doing what we do best. You'll teach those kids to read and think and question. I'll keep the town safe and deal with the occasional drunk cowboy or disputed property line. And anyone who wants to judge us based on old injuries can go straight to hell." Olivia laughed, startled by the unexpected profanity and the fierce protectiveness in his voice. "Deputy Rutherford, that's not very lawman-like language. I'm off duty." His eyes crinkled with humor. "And it's Thomas, remember." "Thomas," she repeated, and liked the way his name felt in her mouth. "Thank you for walking me home. Anytime." He settled his hat back on his head and tipped it to her. "Sleep well, Olivia. Tomorrow's another school day." She watched him limp away into the gathering darkness, his gait steady despite the obvious effort each step required, and felt something shift in her chest. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was the first stirring of possibility, the faint hope that maybe, just maybe, she could be whole again even with her scars. The weeks that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Olivia taught Monday through Friday, pouring her energy into lessons that challenged her students and helped them grow. She discovered she loved teaching even more than she'd expected. Loved watching children's faces light up when they mastered a difficult concept. Loved the questions they asked and the curiosity they brought to learning. Her arm ached by the end of each day from writing on the blackboard and handling books, but it was a good ache, the kind that came from meaningful work. Thomas became a regular presence in her life, though neither of them named what was growing between them. He walked her home most evenings, their conversations ranging from the mundane details of town life to deeper discussions about books, justice, faith, and what it meant to build a life after everything you'd planned had been taken away. Sometimes they sat on the hotel's front porch, watching the town settle for the night, comfortable in each other's silence. Other times they walked to the edge of town where the prairie stretched endlessly in all directions, discussing their pasts and their hopes with increasing honesty. Olivia learned that Thomas had taught himself to read law books and legal codes, that he corresponded with a judge in Denver who advised him on complex cases, that he was building a small library in his office for anyone in town who wanted to borrow books. Thomas learned that Olivia wrote poetry in her spare time, that she'd been engaged before the robbery to a man who'd broken off the engagement when he saw her scars, that she still woke from nightmares, but they were getting less frequent. He was a coward, Thomas said when she told him about the broken engagement. They were sitting on a bench outside the general store on a cool October evening, watching the sun paint the prairie gold and orange. Any man who'd let scars change his mind about the woman he claimed to love wasn't worth having. He said he couldn't stand to look at them, Olivia said quietly. Said they reminded him that I'd been touched by violence, and he wanted a wife who was pure and undamaged. Thomas's jaw tightened. Purity has nothing to do with the body, Olivia. It's about the soul, the character. You survived something that would have broken a weaker person. That's not damage, that's strength. Sometimes I feel broken anyway. We're all broken in one way or another. The question is what we do with the pieces. He gestured to his leg. I could have spent the last 8 years bitter and angry about what I lost. Sometimes I am bitter and angry. But most days I choose to focus on what I can do, who I can help, how I can make this town a little safer and a little more just. The leg doesn't define me unless I let it. Is it really that simple? No, it's actually incredibly difficult. Thomas turned to look at her, his expression serious. But I think it's worth the effort. And I think you're worth the effort too, worth every struggle to keep going despite what happened to you. Olivia wanted to kiss him then, wanted it so badly her chest hurt with it, but fear held her back. What if he didn't want her the same way? What if she was misreading the gentleness in his eyes and the care in his words? What if he only saw her as someone to protect, a duty rather than a desire? As if reading her thoughts, Thomas reached over and took her hand, the scarred one, his fingers gentle on the damaged skin. I think you're extraordinary, Olivia Jenkins. I want you to know that. I think you're pretty extraordinary yourself, Thomas Rutherford. They sat like that as the sun set, hands linked, both of them damaged and healing and finding in each other something that felt like hope. October gave way to November, and with it came the first real cold of approaching winter. Olivia bought warmer clothes and learned to navigate the schoolhouse's temperamental wood stove, which had to be coaxed and cajoled into providing adequate heat. The children arrived each morning with red cheeks and clouds of visible breath, settling into their lessons with the earnestness of young people who understood that education was a privilege not everyone received. One particularly cold afternoon, Jacob, the older boy who'd asked about Olivia's scars that first day, stayed after class. He was a bright student but struggled with reading, and Olivia had been working with him individually to build his confidence. Today, though, he seemed to have something else on his mind. "Miss Jenkins," he said, shifting his weight from foot to foot, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, Jacob." "How did you stop being scared? After the robbery, I mean. You came here all by yourself, started teaching, seemed so brave. But you must have been terrified." Olivia set down the papers she'd been organizing and gave Jacob her full attention. At 14, he was on the cusp of manhood, trying to figure out how to navigate a world that could be both wonderful and cruel. She owed him honesty. "I'm still scared sometimes," she admitted. "I have nightmares. I don't like being in crowded places where I can't see all the exits. If someone moves too quickly near me, I flinch. The fear didn't go away just because I decided to keep living." "Then how do you do it? How do you keep going?" "I do the next right thing. I wake up and I get dressed and I come to school and I teach you and the other students. And then the next day I do it again. Some days that's all I can manage, just the next right thing. But those days add up. And slowly, bit by bit, I'm building a life that's bigger than the fear." She paused, then asked gently, "Why are you asking, Jacob?" The boy looked down at his feet. "My pa says I should quit school, help full-time on the ranch. We're short on workers and money's tight, but I don't want to quit. I like learning. I think maybe I could be more than just a ranch hand, maybe go to college someday or become a teacher myself. But Pa says that's foolish dreaming, says the world doesn't care about boys from poor ranching families." Olivia's heart ached for him. "What does your mother say?" "Ma died when I was little. It's just Pa and me and my 2 younger brothers." "I see." Olivia thought carefully about her next words. "Jacob, I can't tell you what to do. Your father has reasons for his decisions and family obligations are important. But I can tell you this. Education is the one thing no one can ever take away from you. Not robbers, not injury, not poverty, not bad luck. What you learn, what you know, that stays with you forever and opens doors you can't even imagine right now. But how do I convince Pa? Maybe you start by showing him. Keep helping on the ranch, work hard, prove you can do both. And in the meantime, I'll work with you extra when I can, make sure you're progressing as fast as possible. If you're serious about college, we need to get your reading up to par and make sure you're strong in mathematics. It won't be easy. I don't mind hard work, Miss Jenkins. Then we'll figure it out together. Deal. Jacob's face split into a grin. Deal. Thank you, Miss Jenkins. You're the best teacher ever. After he left, Olivia stood alone in the quiet schoolhouse, thinking about fear and courage and the ways people survived the things that tried to break them. She thought about Thomas limping through town every day, doing a job that required him to be on his feet for hours despite the pain. She thought about Jacob, brave enough at 14 to dream bigger than his circumstances. She thought about herself, scarred and nightmared but still standing in front of a classroom every day, still choosing life over surrender. Maybe that was what courage really was. Not the absence of fear, but the decision to keep moving forward even when you were terrified. That evening, Thomas arrived at the schoolhouse just as Olivia was preparing to leave. He looked troubled, his usual calm expression replaced by something darker. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. Olivia felt her stomach drop. "What's wrong?" "There's been a series of robberies in towns along the railroad. Stagecoaches mostly, but also a bank in La Junta. The descriptions of one of the robbers match the man who got away from your stage." The room seemed to tilt. Olivia gripped the edge of her desk, feeling her breath catch in her throat. "Are you sure?" "Not completely. But sure enough that I wanted to warn you. The robberies are moving east, which means they're heading this direction. If this man comes through Ordway, if he recognizes you." Thomas moved closer, his eyes intense with concern. "I won't let anything happen to you, Olivia. I need you to know that." "He won't recognize me," Olivia said, trying to convince herself as much as Thomas. "It's been 6 months. I look different now. I'm in a different context." There's no reason he'd connect a schoolteacher in Ordway with a woman on a stage in Kansas. Maybe, but I'm not taking chances. Thomas pulled a small revolver from his coat pocket and held it out to her. "Do you know how to shoot?" Olivia stared at the gun like it was a snake. "No. I've never touched a firearm." "Then I'm going to teach you. Not because I think you'll need it, but because knowledge is power and I want you to feel safe." His voice was gentle but firm. "You don't have to carry it if you don't want to, but I want you to know how to use it if the need arises." Every instinct in Olivia wanted to refuse. Guns meant violence, meant the sound of gunfire and the smell of blood and the feel of a bullet tearing through her shoulder. But Thomas was right about knowledge being power. She'd been helpless during the robbery, unable to defend herself or the other passengers. She never wanted to feel that helpless again. "All right," she said quietly. "Teach me." They spent the next hour behind the schoolhouse, as Thomas patiently showed her how to hold the revolver, how to aim, how to fire. The first shot made her flinch so hard she nearly dropped the gun, but Thomas steadied her hands with his own, his touch warm and reassuring. "You're safe," he murmured. "I've got you. Try again." She did, and this time when the gun fired, she was ready for the recoil. They practiced until she could hit the target. Thomas had set up more often than not, until her hands stopped shaking quite so badly, until the fear in her chest had transmuted into something resembling confidence. "Good," Thomas said as the sun began to set. "You're a natural. Keep the gun, practice when you can. And Olivia," he waited until she met his eyes, "if anything happens, if you feel unsafe for any reason, you come find me immediately. I don't care if it's the middle of the night or if I'm dealing with something else. You are my priority. Thomas, I'm not your responsibility. No, you're not, but you're important to me, more important than I probably should admit. He took a step closer, his hand coming up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing gently over her skin. I care about you, Olivia, a great deal. And I protect what I care about. Olivia leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly against the rush of emotion. When she opened them again, Thomas was watching her with an expression that made her breath catch for entirely different reasons than fear. I care about you too, she whispered. So much it scares me sometimes. We're both scared then, both damaged, both trying to figure out how to live full lives despite everything that's tried to break us. His other hand came up to frame her face, gentle and sure. But maybe we could try to figure it out together. I'd like that. Thomas leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, but Olivia closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that felt like coming home. It was gentle and sweet, and tinged with the desperation of two lonely people finding unexpected connection. When they finally pulled apart, Thomas rested his forehead against hers, both of them breathing hard. I've wanted to do that for weeks, he admitted. I've wanted you to. They stood like that as darkness fell around them, two damaged people holding each other up, finding in each other's brokenness a strange kind of wholeness. The next few weeks passed in a haze of new romance and cautious happiness. Thomas and Olivia were careful about public displays of affection, mindful of her reputation as a schoolteacher, but everyone in Ordway knew they were courting. The general store's proprietor took credit for predicting the match. The schoolchildren giggled when Thomas came by to walk Olivia home. Even the crusty rancher on the school board nodded approvingly when he saw them together. Good match, he told Thomas one day. Town needs more solid couples putting down roots. Olivia had never expected to feel this way again, this sense of possibility and joy. Thomas was patient with her nightmares, holding her when she woke gasping from dreams of gunfire and violence, never making her feel weak for her fear. She, in turn, learned the rhythms of his pain, recognizing the days when his leg hurt worse and adjusting their walks accordingly, never mentioning it but always aware and accommodating. They were careful with each other in a way that spoke to deep understanding. Thomas never approached her from behind without announcing himself. Olivia never made Thomas feel less capable because of his injury. They built their relationship on a foundation of mutual respect and recognition that everyone carried damage, visible and invisible. And that love meant accepting all of someone, scars included. Christmas approached, and with it plans for a town celebration. Olivia helped her students prepare a program for Christmas Eve, drilling them on poems and songs until they could perform confidently. Thomas took extra shifts to ensure the town stayed peaceful during the influx of visitors who came for the holiday. They stole moments together when they could, quick kisses behind the schoolhouse, long conversations in Thomas's office while he did paperwork, quiet dinners at the hotel restaurant where they talked about everything and nothing. 2 days before Christmas, a stranger rode into town. Olivia was dismissing school for the day when she saw him through the window. A lean man on a dusty horse, his hat pulled low over his face. Something about the way he moved made her chest tighten with instinctive fear. She couldn't see his features clearly, but there was a predatory quality to his presence that made every nerve in her body scream danger. She hurried her students out quickly, keeping herself between them and the stranger even though he was across the street. Once they were gone, she locked the schoolhouse door and made her way toward Thomas's office, trying not to run, trying not to look as frightened as she felt. Thomas took one look at her face and was on his feet immediately, hand going to the gun at his hip. "What's wrong?" "There's a man," He just rode in. I don't know if it's him. I couldn't see his face clearly, but Thomas, something feels wrong. Stay here." Thomas grabbed his coat and headed for the door, but Olivia caught his arm. "Don't go alone. What if it is him? What if he's dangerous?" "That's my job, Olivia. Dealing with dangerous men is what I do." He covered her hand with his, squeezed gently. "Lock the door behind me. If I'm not back in 30 minutes, go to the hotel and stay there." He left before she could argue, his limping gait faster than she'd ever seen it, urgency overriding his usual careful movements. Olivia locked the door as instructed and moved to the window, watching as Thomas approached the stranger who was tying his horse outside the saloon. The conversation appeared civil at first. Thomas's body language was relaxed but alert, and the stranger seemed cooperative, answering questions. But then something shifted. The stranger's hand moved toward his gun, and Thomas's moved faster, his weapon drawn and aimed in the space of a heartbeat. "Don't," Olivia whispered, though no one could hear her. "Please don't let it be him." But it was. She knew it with sick certainty when the stranger turned toward Thomas, and she finally got a clear look at his face. It was older, more weathered than she remembered, but the cruel set of his mouth and the cold eyes were the same. This was the man who'd shot her, who'd killed the stage driver and an elderly passenger, who'd laughed as she bled and begged for mercy. The street outside had gone silent, people scattering at the sight of drawn weapons. Thomas was speaking, his voice too low for Olivia to hear, but his gun never wavered. The stranger said something back, and even from a distance, Olivia could see the contempt in his expression. Then the stranger's gaze swept the street and landed directly on the window where Olivia stood. His eyes widened in recognition, and a slow smile spread across his face. He knew her. Despite the time and distance and changed circumstances, he knew her. "You," he said, loud enough for Olivia to hear through the window. "The one from the Kansas stage. Well, I'll be damned. Didn't think you'd live the way you were bleeding." Thomas's expression turned to stone. "You're under arrest for robbery and murder. You can come peacefully, or we can do this the hard way." The stranger laughed, a sound that made Olivia's blood run cold. "You think you can take me, cripple? I've outdrawn better men than you. Maybe. But I'm the one who already has his gun out, and I'm the one with a reason to shoot you that goes beyond my job." Thomas's voice was ice and fury. "You hurt someone I love, so believe me when I say I'm looking for an excuse to put a bullet in you." Time seemed to slow. Olivia saw the stranger's hand twitch toward his gun. She saw Thomas's finger tighten on the trigger. She opened her mouth to scream a warning, though for who she wasn't sure. The gunshot was impossibly loud, echoing off the buildings. The stranger fell backward, his gun clattering to the ground unfired. Thomas kept his weapon trained on the fallen man, moving forward carefully despite his limp, until he could kick the stranger's gun away and check for a pulse. The silence that followed was broken by Olivia bursting out of the office, all of Thomas's instructions forgotten in her desperate need to make sure he was safe. He caught her as she ran to him, pulling her against his chest with his free arm while keeping his gun trained on the stranger with the other. "I'm all right," he said into her hair. "I'm all right, Olivia. He's down." "Is he dead?" "No, shoulder wound, same as what he gave you." Thomas's voice was grim with satisfaction. Seemed appropriate. Other people were emerging now, the doctor hurrying over with his bag, the rancher from the school board, and several other men coming to help. Thomas handed over his weapon to be held as evidence and helped the doctor restrain the wounded stranger, whose string of curses suggested he would survive to stand trial. "That's him?" the doctor asked Olivia gently. "The man who robbed your stage?" Olivia nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat, The stranger glared at her from the ground, his face twisted with pain and hate. "You should have died," he spat. "Bleeding heart that you were, begging for your life." "But I didn't die," Olivia said, finding her voice. "I survived. I built a new life. I found love and purpose and happiness. And now you're going to jail while I get to keep living. So who really won?" The stranger had no answer for that, and the doctor and several townsmen hauled him off to the jail cell in Thomas's office, where he could be treated and held until the federal marshals arrived. Thomas turned to Olivia, cupping her face in his hands, his eyes searching hers with desperate intensity. "Are you all right? Did seeing him bring it all back?" "Yes," Olivia admitted, "but I'm all right. I'm safe. You kept me safe." "Always," Thomas promised. "I will always keep you safe, Olivia. For as long as you'll let me." "That might be a very long time. I'm counting on it." They stood together in the middle of the street, holding each other while the town buzzed around them with news of the capture. The nightmare that had chased Olivia from Kansas was finally over. The man who'd hurt her was in custody, would face justice for his crimes. She could stop looking over her shoulder, stop flinching at shadows, stop waiting for the past to catch up to her. It already had, and she'd survived it. They both had. Christmas Eve dawned clear and cold, the kind of day that made the prairie sparkle with frost and turned breath into visible clouds. The schoolchildren performed their program to an audience of proud parents and townsfolk, and Olivia watched from the side of the makeshift stage, feeling Thomas's presence beside her like an anchor. After the program, as people mingled and shared cookies and hot cider, Thomas pulled Olivia aside into a quiet corner of the town hall. "I have something for you," he said, pulling a small wrapped package from his coat pocket. "It's not much, but I wanted you to have it." Olivia unwrapped the gift carefully to find a delicate silver chain with a small pendant in the shape of a book. It was simple and perfect, and her eyes filled with tears at the thoughtfulness of it. "It's beautiful, Thomas. It reminded me of you. The book, I mean. You're building something here with those kids, giving them knowledge and opportunity. You're writing their futures in a way." He took the necklace from her shaking hands and fastened it around her neck, his fingers gentle on her scarred skin. "I'm proud of you, Olivia. Proud of your strength and your courage and the way you've refused to let what happened to you define your whole life. I couldn't have done it without you. You made me believe I was still worth something, scars and all. You were always worth something. I just helped you remember." Thomas took her hands in his, and his expression turned serious. "Olivia, I know we haven't been courting long, and I know there are proper timelines for these things, but I don't care about proper timelines. I care about you. I love you, and I want to spend my life with you if you'll have me." Olivia's breath caught. "Thomas, are you asking?" "I'm asking you to marry me. I'm asking you to build a life with me here in Ordway. I'm asking you to take a chance on a deputy with a bad leg who loves you more than he thought he could love anyone." He squeezed her hands gently. "I'm not a perfect man, Olivia. I'm damaged and I have hard days, and sometimes my leg hurts so much I can barely walk. But I promise to love you exactly as you are, scars and nightmares and all. I promise to protect you and support you, and never make you feel less than the extraordinary woman you are. And I promise to spend every day trying to be worthy of you." Tears were streaming down Olivia's face now, but they were good tears, happy tears. "You're already worthy of me, Thomas. And yes, I'll marry you. I love you too so much. You saw past my scars to the person underneath. You made me feel whole again even though parts of me are still broken." "We're all broken," Thomas said, pulling her into his arms. "But maybe broken pieces can fit together and make something beautiful anyway." He kissed her then, in front of the whole town, neither of them caring who saw or what they thought. The applause that erupted around them suggested the town approved, but Olivia barely heard it. She was too focused on the feel of Thomas's lips on hers, the steady beat of his heart against her chest, the promise of a future she'd thought she'd lost forever. They were married on a surprisingly warm day in late January 1883, in the same town hall where Thomas had proposed. The whole town turned out for the wedding, which was conducted by a traveling minister who happened through Ordway at exactly the right time. Olivia wore a dress that Mrs. Henderson had helped her sew, pale blue with lace at the collar that covered her scars. Thomas wore his best suit and stood waiting for her at the makeshift altar with his weight carefully balanced to hide his limp, though Olivia had told him repeatedly that he didn't need to hide anything from her. "I ignore the limp like it means nothing because to me it doesn't mean anything," she'd told him the night before the wedding as they sat together on the hotel porch. "It's part of you, part of your story, but it doesn't define you any more than my scars define me. We're so much more than our injuries, Thomas. I know. But sometimes I still worry you'll wake up one day and realize you could have had someone whole, someone without limitations. I have someone whole. I have you, all of you, and that's all I want." She'd taken his face in her hands, making sure he looked at her. "I love your determination and your kindness and your sense of justice. I love how you make me laugh and how you hold me through nightmares. I love your strength and your gentleness and the way you believe in me even when I struggle to believe in myself. The leg is just the leg, Thomas. It's not what I fell in love with." Now, as she walked down the aisle toward him, Olivia saw those words reflected in his expression. Pure love and gratitude and wonder that they'd found each other against all odds. When he took her hand and spoke his vows, his voice was steady and sure, promising to love and honor her all their days. When she spoke her own vows, she added, "I promise to always see you, truly see you, for who you are beneath the surface. I promise to build a life with you where we both can be fully ourselves, scars and strengths and everything in between." The kiss that sealed their marriage was sweet and tender, and when they turned to face the assembled townsfolk as husband and wife, Olivia felt a completeness she hadn't known was possible. She'd come to Ordway broken and alone, certain her life was over at 23. Instead, she'd found purpose, community, love, and a man who saw her scars as simply part of her story, rather than the sum total of who she was. The reception was held at the hotel, with food provided by seemingly every family in town. There was dancing, which Thomas participated in despite his leg, holding Olivia close and swaying to the music with careful grace. There were toasts and laughter and so much joy that Olivia's face hurt from smiling. Late in the evening, as the party was winding down, Jacob approached them with a shy smile. "Congratulations, Mrs. Rutherford, you too, Deputy." "Thank you, Jacob," Olivia said warmly, "and thank you for the poem you wrote for us. It was beautiful. I've been practicing my writing like you said. I talked to my pa, told him I wanted to stay in school. He wasn't happy about it at first, but I promised to work extra hours on the weekends and he agreed." Jacob's face lit up. "I'm going to finish school, Miss Jenkins. Mrs. Rutherford, I mean. And then maybe I'll go to college just like we talked about." "I'm so proud of you," Olivia said, hugging him impulsively. "You're going to do wonderful things, Jacob." After the boy left, Thomas pulled Olivia close. "You're changing lives here, you know, not just Jacob's, but all those kids. You're giving them possibilities they never would have had otherwise." "We're changing lives," Olivia corrected. "You show them every day that limitations don't have to limit you, that a man with a limp can still be the best lawman in the territory. That visible damage doesn't mean you're not valuable. We're quite a pair, aren't we?" Thomas smiled and pressed a kiss to her temple. "The scarred schoolteacher and the limping lawman." "No," Olivia said firmly. The brilliant teacher and the dedicated deputy who happened to have scars and a limp. Let's get the order right. Yes, madam, I stand corrected. They moved to their new home that night, a small house at the edge of town that Thomas had been fixing up for weeks. It wasn't fancy, just 3 rooms and a porch, but it was theirs. Olivia stood in the doorway of their bedroom, suddenly nervous now that they were alone and married and about to share a bed for the first time. Thomas must have sensed her tension because he came up behind her slowly, announcing his presence so she wouldn't startle. "We don't have to do anything tonight except sleep," he said quietly. "I know the scars make you self-conscious, and I know you have reason to be afraid of men after what happened. We can take as much time as you need." Olivia turned to face him, struck once again by his patience and understanding. "I'm not afraid of you, Thomas. I trust you completely. I'm just afraid I'll disappoint you. The scars go further than what you've seen. My whole shoulder and part of my chest, they're not pleasant to look at." "Olivia, look at me." Thomas waited until her eyes met his. "I love you, all of you. The scars are part of you, and I don't find them unpleasant or disappointing or anything except evidence that you survived something terrible. If you want to keep them covered, I understand and I'll respect that. But if you're willing to let me see them, I promise I won't turn away." Slowly, hands trembling slightly, Olivia began to unbutton her dress. Thomas helped her with the fastenings she couldn't reach, his touch gentle and reverent. When the dress fell away and then her chemise, revealing the full extent of the scarring that twisted across her shoulder and collarbone and part of her chest, Thomas's expression didn't change. He simply reached out and traced the scars with careful fingers, following their path across her skin. "You're beautiful," he said simply. "Every part of you." Olivia felt tears prick her eyes. "You're sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." Thomas pulled her close, skin against skin, and Olivia felt something inside her finally truly relax. She was safe, she was loved, she was home. Their lovemaking was tender and careful, both of them mindful of each other's damaged places. Thomas's leg cramped halfway through, and they had to pause while Olivia massaged the spasming muscle, both of them laughing despite the interruption. It wasn't perfect or smooth, but it was real and honest and full of love, and that was better than perfect anyway. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, Thomas's hand resting on Olivia's scarred shoulder while she traced the damaged muscles of his thigh. "We're going to be all right, aren't we?" Olivia whispered. "Despite everything that's happened to us, despite all the ways we're broken, better than all right," Thomas promised. "We're going to be happy. We're going to build a good life here, raise children if we're blessed with them, grow old together. The scars and the limp, they're just details in a much bigger story. I like that story. So do I, and the best part is we get to write it together." Spring came to Ordway with a rush of warm wind and greening prairie. Olivia's belly began to swell with their first child, a development that filled them both with joy and a measure of fear. The pregnancy was uncomfortable, her scarred shoulder aching with the additional weight and her nightmares returning briefly with the stress of impending motherhood. But Thomas was patient and supportive, rubbing her sore muscles and holding her through the bad dreams and talking to her belly as though the baby could already hear him. "What if I'm not a good mother?" Olivia asked one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. "What if the scars and the nightmares mean I'm too damaged to raise a child properly?" "You're the best teacher in the territory," Thomas said firmly. "You're patient and kind, and you believe in children's potential. You're going to be an excellent mother, Olivia. And even if you struggle sometimes, you won't be alone. I'll be right here helping you every step of the way." "What about your leg? Will you be able to keep up with a child?" Thomas laughed. "I'll manage." Might not be able to chase them quite as fast as an able-bodied father, but I'll figure it out. We always do, don't we? We adapt and overcome and find ways to do what needs doing despite our limitations. Their son was born on a warm June day in 1883, after a labor that was long but mercifully uncomplicated. Thomas paced outside the bedroom while the doctor and Mrs. Henderson attended Olivia, his limp more pronounced than usual from the stress and the hours of walking. When the baby's cry finally split the air, Thomas burst through the door before anyone could invite him in, his face a mixture of terror and joy. "Is she all right? Is the baby all right?" "Both fine," the doctor assured him. "You have a healthy son, Deputy. Congratulations." Thomas moved to the bed where Olivia lay exhausted and radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. Their son had a shock of dark hair and his father's blue eyes, and when Thomas reached out to touch the baby's tiny hand, the infant gripped his finger with surprising strength. "Hello, little one," Thomas whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm your father. I'm going to do my best by you, I promise." "What should we name him?" Olivia asked, looking between her husband and her son with overwhelming love. They discussed names for weeks but hadn't been able to agree on anything. Now, though, looking at her son's perfect face and her husband's wonder-filled expression, Olivia knew exactly what felt right. "Samuel," she said. "After your father, Samuel Thomas Rutherford." Thomas's eyes filled with tears. He leaned down to kiss Olivia's forehead, then his son's. "Samuel, that's perfect. He's perfect. You're perfect. I love you both so much." The early days of parenthood were exhausting and overwhelming and absolutely wonderful. Samuel was a good baby, healthy and alert, and he seemed completely unbothered by his mother's scars or his father's limp. Olivia had worried about nursing with her damaged shoulder, but she found ways to position Samuel that worked, adapting as she'd learned to adapt to everything else. Thomas proved to be a devoted father despite his concerns about keeping up with a child. He fashioned a carrier that distributed Samuel's weight evenly, so his leg wouldn't strain as much when he walked with the baby. He sang to Samuel in a surprisingly good baritone voice, teaching their son old trail songs and hymns. And he changed diapers and warmed bottles and paced the floor during fussy nights without complaint, splitting the work of parenting evenly with Olivia. "You're a natural at this," Olivia told him one night as she watched him rock Samuel to sleep, his limping gait transformed into a soothing rhythm. "So are you. I told you you would be." Olivia returned to teaching that fall, with Mrs. Henderson watching Samuel during school hours. It was hard to leave her son each morning, but she loved teaching too much to give it up entirely, and the extra income helped with the expenses of a growing family. Her students were thrilled to meet baby Samuel when she brought him to the schoolhouse one afternoon, cooing over him and begging to hold him until Olivia had to laugh at their enthusiasm. Jacob, now 15 and preparing to take the exam that would allow him to attend university, was particularly taken with the baby. "He's lucky," Jacob told Olivia as he carefully held Samuel. "He's got parents who'll teach him he can do anything, be anything, regardless of what challenges he faces." "That's a real gift, Mrs. Rutherford. You have that too, Jacob. You've proven you can overcome obstacles and chase your dreams. I'm proud of you. I couldn't have done it without you believing in me first." The years rolled forward in a succession of seasons and growth. Samuel grew into a bright, active toddler who inherited his father's determination and his mother's curiosity. Olivia gave birth to a daughter, Emma, in 1885, a tiny thing with blonde hair and her mother's hazel eyes. Then came another son, Daniel, in 1887, completing their family. Thomas continued as deputy, becoming sheriff when the previous sheriff retired in 1886. His leg never got better, but he never let it slow him down either. He taught his children to ride horses by the time they could walk, to shoot safely by the time they were 10, and to value justice and kindness above all else. The sight of Sheriff Rutherford limping down Ordway's main street with one or more of his children in tow became as familiar as the sunrise. Olivia expanded the school as the town grew, eventually hiring an assistant teacher to help manage the increasing number of students. She never tried to hide her scars, and over time she noticed something wonderful. The children of Ordway grew up thinking nothing of them. To them, Mrs. Rutherford was just their teacher, the scars as unremarkable as Mr. Henderson's spectacles or Dr. Morrison's beard. A whole generation was learning that physical differences didn't determine a person's worth. Jacob fulfilled his dream of attending college, becoming the first person from Ordway to do so. He wrote letters to Olivia throughout his studies, thanking her repeatedly for refusing to let him give up on himself. When he graduated in 1888 and returned to Ordway to establish the town's first law practice, Olivia and Thomas were in the audience, bursting with pride as though he were their own son. "You did that," Thomas told Olivia as they watched Jacob accept his degree. "You changed that boy's life." "We did that," Olivia corrected. "You showed him that limitations don't have to limit you. I just showed him how to read. You showed him a lot more than that." The man who'd robbed Olivia's stage and shot her was tried, convicted, and hanged in 1883. Olivia didn't attend the execution, didn't need to witness it to find closure. The real closure had come when she'd looked him in the eye on Ordway's main street and told him she'd survived, that she'd built a life, that she'd won. Everything after that was just legal formality. Sometimes she still had nightmares. Sometimes her shoulder ached on cold days and she couldn't lift things the way she once had. Sometimes she saw her scars in the mirror and felt a flash of the old shame and pain. But those moments grew further apart as the years passed, overshadowed by the fullness of the life she'd built. Thomas's leg grew worse as he aged, arthritis settling into the damaged joint and making some days almost unbearable. On those days, Olivia would help him with his boots, massage the aching muscles, bring him willow bark tea for the pain. Their children learned to recognize their father's hard days and adjust accordingly, bringing him things so he didn't have to walk as much, reading to him to keep him occupied when he had to stay off his feet. "Does it bother you?" Thomas asked Olivia one evening in 1890 as she rubbed liniment into his leg. They were in their 40s now, no longer the young people who'd found each other scarred and broken but not beaten. "That you married a man who gets more limited every year. You could have found someone whole." Olivia looked at her husband, at the silver threading through his dark hair, at the laugh lines around his eyes, at the steady strength that had never wavered in all their years together. "You are whole, Thomas. You always have been. A leg that doesn't work right doesn't make you any less of a man, any less of a husband, any less of a father. You're everything I could have wanted and more, even with the limp. I've told you before, I ignore the limp like it means nothing, and you ignore my scars the same way." "Because they don't mean anything," Thomas said, reaching up to touch her scarred shoulder with familiar tenderness. "Except that you survived, that you're strong, that you're mine and I'm yours and we built something beautiful together despite everything. We did, didn't we?" Olivia smiled and leaned down to kiss him. "We really did." In 1892, Olivia finally published her first book of poetry, a slim volume that included pieces about survival, love, prairie life, and the beauty found in broken things. The local newspaper praised it, and orders came in from across Colorado and beyond. She dedicated the book to Thomas, writing simply, "To my husband who taught me that scars and strength can coexist, and that love sees the heart before the surface." Thomas carried that dedication in his pocket, the page cut carefully from his own copy of the book, until it was soft with wear and the words had nearly faded. When Emma found it years later while doing laundry, she asked him why he kept it. "Because it reminds me what really matters," Thomas said simply. "Your mother and I, we found each other when we were both damaged. Everyone saw the injuries first, made judgments based on what we couldn't do anymore instead of what we could. But we saw each other differently. She looked past my limp and I looked past her scars, and we found two people who understood what it meant to be broken but not beaten. That's worth remembering, Emma. In this world, find people who see you for who you really are, not just what they can see on the surface." The children grew and eventually left home one by one. Samuel became a teacher like his mother, taking a position at a school in Denver. Emma married a kind rancher from the next county over and started her own family. Daniel followed his father into law enforcement, becoming a deputy in a larger town to the north. They all came home for holidays and important occasions, bringing grandchildren for Olivia and Thomas to spoil. On a warm evening in June 1902, Olivia and Thomas sat on their porch watching the sunset, as they'd done countless times over the 20 years of their marriage. They were 58 and 62 now, gray-haired and slowed by age and old injuries, but still deeply in love. "Do you remember the first time we really talked?" Olivia asked, her head resting on Thomas's shoulder. "At the school board meeting. I remember thinking you were the bravest person I'd ever met. Standing there in front of all those skeptical men, showing them your scars and daring them to see past the damage to the capable woman underneath. I remember you were the only one who looked at my face instead of my arm. I was looking for what mattered. Found it too." Thomas kissed the top of her head. "Best decision I ever made, voting for you that night. Changed my whole life. Mine too." Olivia lifted her scarred arm and laced her fingers through his. "I came to Ordway broken and alone and certain my life was over at 23. Instead, I found you. I found purpose and community and love. I found out that the scars don't define me unless I let them. We found out we're more than our injuries," Thomas said. "Both of us. We're parents and partners and professionals. We're people who have contributed to this town and raised good children and built a strong marriage. The limp and the scars, they're just details in a much bigger story. A good story. The best story, our story." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the prairie in shades of gold and orange and purple. Tomorrow they would wake and go about their lives, Thomas to his office and Olivia to her school. They would deal with aching joints and old injuries, with the weight of scars both visible and invisible. But they would do it together, as they'd done everything else for 20 years. Two people who'd been broken but found wholeness in each other. Two people who'd looked past surface damage to see the strength and beauty underneath. Two people who'd learned that love doesn't require perfection, just acceptance and perseverance, and the determination to keep building something good even when the world tries to tear you down. The scars would always be there. The limp would never go away, but those limitations had never stopped them from living full, rich lives. They were exactly what they'd promised to be on their wedding day. Fully themselves, scars and strengths and everything in between, building a life together where both could thrive. And that, Olivia thought as Thomas pulled her closer and the stars began to appear overhead, was more than enough. It was everything. Years continued to pass in the way they do, each one both familiar and new. The town of Ordway grew steadily, expanding beyond its original railroad boundaries to become a thriving community. More businesses opened, more families settled, and the schoolhouse that Olivia had started in a converted shed grew into a proper two-room building with a bell tower and glass windows. In 1905, when Olivia was 61, the school board held a ceremony honoring her 23 years of service to the town's children. Former students came from as far away as Denver to attend, many of them now adults with children of their own. Jacob, successful in his law practice and now serving as a county judge, gave a speech that had half the audience in tears. "Mrs. Rutherford taught me more than reading and arithmetic," he said from the podium, his voice carrying clearly through the packed town hall. "She taught me that circumstances don't determine destiny. That visible damage doesn't mean you're less valuable or less capable. That courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to keep moving forward despite it. She taught me those lessons not just with words, but by living them every single day. She showed up with her scars visible, her arm limited, and her heart completely open. She never pretended to be perfect, but she was exactly what we needed, real and honest and strong. This town owes her a debt we can never fully repay." Thomas, now 65, and using a cane more often than not due to his worsening leg, stood beside Olivia as she accepted a plaque commemorating her service. His eyes were bright with unshed tears, and when she looked at him, he mouthed, "I'm so proud of you." She mouthed back, "I love you." The ceremony ended with a surprise. The school board announced they were naming the new school building the Jenkins Rutherford School, honoring both Olivia's teaching and Thomas's service to the community. Olivia protested that it was too much, but the board chairman, now the grown son of the rancher who'd been on the board when she first arrived, shook his head firmly. "It's not enough," he said. "You two showed this town what real strength looks like, what commitment and service and love look like. You deserve this recognition and more." Later that evening, as they sat in their usual spot on the porch, Thomas took Olivia's hand and held it against his chest. "We made something good here, didn't we?" "We did. Not just the children we raised or the work we did, but the example we set. That broken people can build whole lives. That scars and limps don't disqualify you from contributing to the world. That love and acceptance matter more than physical perfection." "Do you ever regret it?" Thomas asked quietly. "Staying in Ordway, marrying me, building this life?" "You could have gone to a big city, maybe found better doctors for your arm, had an easier life." Olivia turned to look at him fully, taking in his beloved face with its weathered lines and kind eyes. "Thomas Rutherford, I have never regretted a single moment of our life together. You gave me exactly what I needed when I needed it most: acceptance, respect, and love without conditions. You saw past my scars to the woman I was trying to become. How could I regret that? I just worry sometimes that I held you back, that my limitations became your limitations." "Your only limitation is occasionally thinking you're limited," Olivia said firmly. "You've been sheriff of this town for 16 years. You've kept the peace, solved crimes, mentored young deputies, and earned the respect of everyone who knows you. You've been an amazing father and an even better husband. You've read more law books than most lawyers, educated yourself beyond what most people ever achieve, and used that knowledge to make this community better. Where exactly did your leg hold you back?" Thomas smiled, that soft smile that still made Olivia's heart flutter even after 22 years of marriage. "You always know what to say to make me feel better." "It's not about making you feel better. It's about telling you the truth. The same truth you told me all those years ago when I was terrified that my scars made me worthless. We are so much more than our injuries, Thomas. We always have been." They sat together as night fell. Two people who'd found each other scarred and healing, who'd built a life on a foundation of mutual acceptance and unwavering love. The prairie wind whispered through the grass, carrying the sounds of the town settling for the evening, familiar and comforting. In 1908, Thomas finally had to retire from his position as sheriff. His leg had deteriorated to the point where walking even with a cane was agony, and the doctor warned that he risked permanent immobility if he didn't rest it properly. It was one of the hardest decisions Thomas ever made, leaving the job he'd loved and excelled at for over 2 decades, but he did it with the same quiet dignity he brought to everything else. The town threw him a retirement party that rivaled their wedding in attendance. Former criminals he'd arrested came to shake his hand and thank him for treating them fairly even when enforcing the law. Young deputies he'd trained spoke about his patience and wisdom. Town leaders praised his integrity and dedication. And through it all, Thomas sat with his bad leg propped on a chair, Olivia beside him holding his hand, looking slightly overwhelmed by the outpouring of affection and respect. "I just did my job," he kept saying, but everyone who spoke disagreed. He'd done far more than his job. He'd proven that a man with a pronounced limp could be one of the finest lawmen in Colorado. He'd shown that physical limitations didn't limit a person's value or capability. He'd set an example that inspired others to look beyond surface appearances to the character underneath. "You're a legend, Sheriff," one young deputy told him earnestly. "Every lawman in the territory has heard about you, the sheriff who refused to let a bad leg stop him from being the best at what he did." Thomas looked uncomfortable with the praise, but Olivia squeezed his hand and whispered, "Accept it gracefully. You've earned it." Retirement was an adjustment for Thomas. He'd been active and working for so long that sitting still felt wrong at first. But gradually he found new ways to contribute. He started writing articles about law enforcement for newspapers, sharing the knowledge he'd accumulated over decades. He mentored young people considering careers in law enforcement or law, teaching them about justice and integrity, and the importance of treating everyone with respect, regardless of their circumstances. And he spent more time with his grandchildren, teaching them to fish and telling them stories about the old days while Olivia sat nearby, usually with a book or her knitting. Olivia continued teaching until 1910, when she was 66 and ready to pass the torch to a new generation. Her retirement ceremony was similarly emotional, with students spanning 3 decades coming to honor the woman who taught them to read and write and think critically about the world. "Mrs. Rutherford gave me more than an education," one former student said, a middle-aged woman who'd been in Olivia's very first class. "She gave me the courage to believe I could be more than what my circumstances suggested. She showed us that damage doesn't diminish you, that scars are just evidence of survival, and that real strength comes from getting up every day and choosing to keep trying despite whatever challenges you face. I've carried those lessons with me for my entire adult life." When it was Olivia's turn to speak, she looked out at the assembled crowd and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "I came to Ordway 28 years ago carrying a carpet bag and a lot of scars, both visible and invisible. I was certain my life was essentially over at 23, that the robbery had taken everything that mattered. But this town, and particularly one limping deputy with kind eyes, taught me otherwise. You gave me purpose and community and love. You let me contribute and grow and become more than I thought possible. Teaching your children has been the greatest privilege of my life, and I thank you for trusting me with them despite my obvious damage." "You were never damaged, Mrs. Rutherford," someone called out from the crowd. You were exactly what we needed. We're all damaged in some way, Olivia corrected gently. Every single one of us carries scars, visible or invisible. The question isn't whether we're damaged, but what we do despite the damage. Do we give up? Or do we keep building lives that matter, contributing to our communities, loving and being loved, finding purpose and joy despite our limitations? I chose to keep going, and I'm so grateful I did. I'm grateful for every student I taught, every lesson I learned, every friend I made, and especially for the man who looked past my scars to see me. This has been a beautiful life, and I wouldn't change a single part of it. The applause was thunderous, and when Olivia returned to her seat beside Thomas, he pulled her close and kissed her temple. Beautiful speech from a beautiful woman. We're both old and gray now, Thomas. Beautiful is a stretch. You've always been beautiful to me. The scars never changed that. He took her hand and pressed it to his lips. Thank you for building this life with me, Olivia. Thank you for seeing past my limp and loving me anyway. There was never any anyway about it, Olivia said softly. I loved you completely, limp included, from almost the beginning. Just like you loved me completely, scars included. We were quite a pair, weren't we? Still are, the best pair. They spent their retirement years in gentle contentment, surrounded by children and grandchildren who visited often. Samuel brought his students to meet his parents occasionally, showing them the couple who'd modeled what teaching and service looked like. Emma's children spent summers in Ordway, learning prairie skills from their grandfather and hearing stories from their grandmother. Daniel brought his law enforcement colleagues by to meet the legendary Sheriff Rutherford, who always downplayed his accomplishments while Olivia rolled her eyes affectionately and told the real stories. In 1914, Olivia published a second book, this one a memoir of her years in Ordway. She wrote honestly about the robbery and its aftermath, about coming west damaged and afraid, about finding love and purpose despite her scars. She wrote about Thomas and their children, about the students she'd taught and the community she'd served, about the gradual healing that came not from the scars disappearing, but from learning to carry them with grace. The book was successful beyond her expectations, selling copies throughout Colorado and beyond. She received letters from women who'd survived their own traumas, thanking her for showing them that life could still be full and meaningful after violence. She received letters from people with disabilities and disfigurements, thanking her for normalizing visible difference. And she received letters from teachers and lawmen, thanking her and Thomas for demonstrating that dedication and character mattered more than physical perfection. Thomas read every letter, his eyes often damp with tears. "You're touching lives you never even met," he told Olivia one evening as they sorted through the latest batch of correspondence. "All these people finding hope and courage in your story, our story." "It's important that people know," Olivia said, "that scars and limps and all manner of damage don't have to mean the end of everything. That you can survive terrible things and still build beautiful lives. That love doesn't require perfection, just acceptance and commitment." We've been preaching that sermon for over 30 years now, haven't we? Living it, more than preaching it. But yes. Olivia smiled and took his hand, her scarred one fitting perfectly into his work-roughened one. "And I'll keep living it until my last breath. This life with you, Thomas, has been everything I never knew I needed." On a warm June evening in 1922, exactly 40 years after they first met at that school board meeting, Olivia and Thomas sat on their porch watching yet another sunset. They were both in their late 70s now, slowed by age and old injuries that had never fully healed. Thomas's leg was nearly useless, requiring him to use a wheelchair more often than not. Olivia's arm had limited mobility, and her shoulder ached constantly despite the medicines the doctor prescribed. But their minds were sharp, and their love was as strong as ever, perhaps stronger for having weathered 4 decades of life together. 40 years, Thomas said wonderingly. How did we get so lucky? I don't think luck had much to do with it, Olivia replied. I think we both made choices. We chose to see past surface damage. We chose to accept each other completely. We chose to build something together despite everything that had tried to break us separately. Those were conscious decisions, not luck. Fair point. But I still feel lucky. Lucky that you came to Ordway, lucky that I was on that school board, lucky that you gave a limping deputy a chance. I didn't give you a chance. I fell in love with you. Olivia turned to look at him, at the face she'd loved for 4 decades, weathered now with age but still achingly dear. You made me feel seen, Thomas. Truly seen, not just as a collection of scars and trauma, but as a whole person with value and capability and worth. That was the greatest gift anyone ever gave me. You did the same for me. Made me feel like the limp didn't diminish me, didn't make me less of a man or less worthy of love and respect. You never pitied me or treated me as though I needed protecting. You just loved me, damaged leg and all. Because the leg was never the important part. You were the important part. Your kindness and strength and integrity and humor and dedication. All the things that made you who you were beneath the surface. The limp was just logistics, not definition. Thomas laughed softly. Just logistics. I like that. And your scars were just evidence of survival, not definition. Exactly. We understood that about each other from the beginning. That's why this worked so well, why it's lasted so long. We saw each other truly and loved what we saw. They fell silent, watching the sun sink below the horizon in a blaze of orange and gold. The prairie stretched endlessly around them, the same landscape they'd navigated together for 40 years. Ordway had grown and changed during that time, transforming from a rough railroad town into an established community, but the fundamental character of the place remained. It was still a place where people helped each other, where children received education, where justice prevailed more often than not. You think we made a difference? Thomas asked quietly. In the grand scheme of things, did our lives matter? Olivia considered the question seriously. I think we taught a lot of children to read and think critically. I think you kept this town safe and fair for over 2 decades. I think we raised 3 good humans who are raising good humans of their own. I think we showed people that damage doesn't have to be limiting, that scars and limps are just details in much bigger stories. I think we loved each other well and built a strong marriage that weathered everything life threw at us. So yes, Thomas, I think we made a difference. Maybe not in ways that make history books, but in ways that matter to the people whose lives we touched. That's enough then, more than enough. It's everything. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, their grandchildren spilled out onto the porch, bringing lemonade and cookies and breathless stories about their day's adventures. Thomas and Olivia made room for the little ones to climb into their laps, settling in to listen and laugh and love these young people who represented their legacy. Looking at Thomas over the heads of their grandchildren, seeing the joy in his eyes and the contentment in his expression, Olivia felt a wave of profound gratitude. The stagecoach robbery that had scarred her, the horse kick that had crippled him, those events could have destroyed them. Should have destroyed them, by many people's reckoning. Instead, they'd become the foundation for something beautiful, because they'd refused to let their injuries define them, because they'd looked past surface damage to see the strength and value underneath. Because they'd chosen, every single day for 40 years, to build lives that mattered despite their limitations. The scars would always be there, visible reminders of a terrible day. The limp would never improve, a permanent alteration to how Thomas moved through the world. But those things had never diminished them, had never made them less worthy of love or respect or full, meaningful lives. They were exactly what they'd promised to be on their wedding day, fully themselves, scars and strengths and everything in between. And they'd spent 40 years proving that broken pieces could fit together to make something whole and beautiful and lasting. As the evening deepened and their grandchildren's voices filled the air with laughter and questions, and the particular kind of joy that only children can bring, Olivia reached across the space between her chair and Thomas's wheelchair to take his hand. He squeezed back immediately, his grip still strong despite the years, and smiled at her with all the love and understanding that had sustained them through 4 decades. "I love you," she mouthed silently. "I love you too," he mouthed back. "Always have, always will." And in that moment, surrounded by the fruits of their love and their labor, scarred and limping and completely whole in the ways that mattered most, they were content. They'd built something good, something lasting, something worth every struggle and challenge and moment of doubt. They'd survived. They'd thrived. They'd loved and been loved in return. And that was the best story of all, the one they'd been writing together since that first school board meeting when a scarred woman and a limping man had looked at each other and seen not damage but possibility, not limitation but potential, not brokenness but the promise of wholeness found in mutual acceptance and unwavering love. The end.